All right. Okay. I'd like to call the Town of Fraser Board of Trustees meeting to order at 6:06. Sorry for being late. Had some technical difficulties that we're still working through. Can I have a roll call, please?
Katie Fisher,
Adam Quicklin,
Peggy Smith,
Julie White,
Louis Gregory.
Katie Souls.
And Brian Cirkvenick. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion passes. Moving on to the consent agenda, entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes for July 17th, 2024, the minutes for July 31st, 2024, a resolution 2024-0801 Grand County Fishing Company Winter Park Fly Fisher License, and Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Letter of Commitment.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I don't have it pulled up, but I think there's a correction on the minutes in the last meeting. I was not there.
On 31st?
I think it has my name listed.
It does. Yeah, Lewis wasn't at that meeting. Which meeting? 31st. 31st. Okay.
So do we want to pull that from the consent agenda and put it on next
Can you
meeting?
just make a correction to the
Or
minute?
can we?
I think I can make that in the motion. If you'd like to make that a part of the motion, they'll remove Lewis from the attendance on the July 31st meeting. Okay. That's
So moved.
A second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to open forum. This is for business not on the agenda. If you'd like to approach the microphone, we will give you 3 minutes. And again, this is for items not on the agenda. Anyone in the room? Okay. Anyone online? Okay. Moving on to discussion possible action regarding dye tracer injections to the Fraser River. Presentation, Connor Newman, USGS.
Hi there. Sorry, I was getting an error that I was not allowed to unmute, but that's been fixed now. So if I go into presentation mode here, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this with the town of Fraser. As I'm getting my presentation pulled up, I'll mention that I gave the same presentation yesterday at the Town of Winter Parks meeting, and I've been working closely with Catherine Morris of the East Grand Water Quality Board and Learning by Doing, and she has been immensely helpful in bringing this to the discussion that we're having here today. So I'm assuming that folks in the room can see my screen. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Connor Newman. I'm a groundwater specialist with the Colorado Water Science Center of the U.S. Geological Survey, and we're one of the agencies in the state of Colorado that conducts hydrologic research and evaluation, oftentimes in collaboration with local entities. And I'm going to be talking today about a proposal to conduct a dye tracer injection within the Fraser River. I'm going to start off this presentation just briefly by talking about the sources of water to streams in areas such as the Upper Colorado River Basin, these mountainous areas with lots of snowpack. And we can generally think of stream water as being made up of 3 different components or buckets, we could classify it as, and the relative fractions of these different components changes through time. In these mountain streams, and it's very important for understanding the overall availability of water in the stream. So the first type of bucket here is quick flow or runoff. So that's runoff from recent rainflow that you can often see flowing over the surface into creeks and rivers. The second type is bank flow, and bank flow is maybe runoff, rain runoff from just a few hours ago, or maybe 1 to 2 days prior, that is stored within the sediments very close to the river for a short period of time, hours to maybe a day or two. And then that bank flow is more slowly released into the stream. And the third component that I'll be concentrating on primarily tonight is base flow, and that's groundwater discharge. And so this schematic on the left-hand side of the screen here shows these three different components of water that's found within the stream at any one time. And I like this schematic because it shows that groundwater discharge is primarily occurring below the stream surface. So it oftentimes occurs on the stream bed itself. And so it's very difficult to locate where that groundwater is coming in. And as a subsequently, because it's difficult to locate, it's also very difficult to measure the amount of groundwater that is flowing into the stream. And the graphics on the right show conceptually how we would expect these different components to change relative to one another through time. So the blue line in this upper right graphic shows the conceptual total amount of stream flow at any one time. And you can see that it varies substantially throughout the year. This is what we observe in areas of the Colorado River Basin like Fraser. We get a large peak of snowmelt runoff, and so the rivers are all running very high at that time. And then when we get into fall and winter, the rivers are much lower. And during those periods where the stream flow is much lower, it's possible that the entire quantity of water within the stream at that time is made up of this groundwater base flow discharge. And that means that groundwater discharge is very important for regulating habitat for aquatic animals and insects, because in some instances, the presence of water at all in the stream and also the temperature of that water depends on the groundwater discharge. And so for these reasons, it's important to understand groundwater discharge from both an ecological perspective and from a water management perspective. The study that we would be conducting this proposed dye tracer test as part of is focused throughout the upper Colorado River Basin. It's part of 6 watersheds that we're looking at in conjunction with this next generation water observing system. So the federal government's always got to have a long acronym. So NGWAS is the acronym for this study. We're focusing in these 6 watersheds of the Colorado River. The 6 focus watersheds are shown here, kind of where there's these groupings of points. And the Fraser River is the easternmost of our 6 study watersheds. And these watersheds all have variable geology and human land use, and also different amounts of anthropogenic interaction with the streams. And the goal throughout this whole NGWAS program is to be able to quantify the groundwater contribution to the streams in all of these different, very different geographic areas, to come up with a greater understanding of how we could be able to predict stream water into the future with changing climate and other concerns. So this is where we get into the meat of why we would be conducting this proposed dye tracer test. As I mentioned, groundwater discharge is very difficult to find because it's occurring along the bed of the stream. So the reason that we conduct a dye tracer test is that we depend on the dilution of the dye. So I'll go through that a bit more detail here. What we do is we go at the upstream end of our study reach, the area we're interested in understanding the groundwater.
Cutting out horribly.
Oh,
Hold
I'm
on,
cutting
we
out.
can't understand you.
Oh, okay.
Hold
Yeah.
on, Connor. I don't know if you can hear us, but you cut out for 30 seconds there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can hear you. I'm not sure if it's
It's us. We just got an unstable internet connection notice.
Okay. So go back about 30 seconds.
Okay,
Talking about
Uh,
the dye in the river.
okay,
Polluting
can
the
everyone hear me now?
Yeah.
Is it a little better? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So the reason that we would use a dye tracer test is that we depend on the dilution of the dye. So if we're looking at the Fraser River through the town, through Winter Park and Fraser, we would inject the dye in the town of Winter Park so that it flows downstream, and we inject for about half a day, between 6 to 10 hours probably. And the goal is to reach a steady state, a plateau concentration of the dye throughout that entire river reach that we're interested in investigating. Now, once we've been injecting for that period of time, and we can assure that the dye has reached that steady state, we will walk down the river with a sensor that can measure the concentration of the dye just by placing the sensor in the water. And anywhere where the dye concentration goes down, there has been some inflow of water that has no dye in it. So it's diluting the dye. And the two sources of water that could be responsible for this are tributaries. So, for instance, there's Elk Creek and St. Louis Creek in the Fraser River that would dilute the dye. We know where those two tributaries are, in addition to other smaller tributaries. Now, anywhere where there's a dilution of the dye but no tributary, that's where we know there's groundwater inflowing into the stream. So we can see the same type of data set as we would be collecting in the Fraser River. These photos are from the Slate River near Crested Butte, which is one of our other study areas. So we did this dye tracer injection in the Slate River in November of 2022. And you can see on this plot of the Slate River, the black circles are the dye concentrations. So everywhere where the dye is going down, there's groundwater inflowing into the river. And so this is how we can locate those locations of groundwater discharge. I wanted to discuss with everyone the widespread use of these dye tracers, both for scientific purposes and just for celebratory purposes. So the fluorescent dye that we would be proposing to use is called fluorescin. And this same dye is used around the country just to dye water green on St. Patrick's Day. So I think many people probably heard about the Chicago River is dyed green every St. Patrick's Day. This paragraph on the right I got from a website from the company that used to supply the dye to the city of Chicago. Apparently, they used to use fluorescin, and then the same dye we will use, and then they switched at some point in 2009, I guess. And it's got an interesting story here about why they're dyeing the Chicago River green, other than that it's just fun. But the purpose of including this is to show that this is done widely for non-scientific purposes, and they use concentrations of fluorescin that are much, much greater than the concentration that we would be proposing to use in the Fraser River. So this very vibrant, bright green, that would only be present in the Fraser River right where we're doing the injection. It would be a much more subtle shade of green everywhere else. And then I also learned in the course of doing this research that Tampa Bay uses fluorescin to dye the bay green on St. Patrick's Day. So there's a couple links here to stories about how fluorescin is used just in celebrations. In addition to being widely used for non-scientific purposes, fluorescin is used in ecological studies, and it's completely non-toxic at the concentrations that we would be using it at. Those concentrations would range from 30 to 120 parts per billion. Because we're injecting the dye and then it's flowing downstream, the highest concentrations are around the injection point, and then it will be diluted as it moves downstream. So this is the 30 parts per billion is what we estimate it would be down at the confluence with St. Louis Creek. And this is both a quote and a photograph from John Ewert, who's a aquatic biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And Catherine and I discussed with John his experience with using fluorescent dye. And as you can see in the quote, he mentioned that it's regularly used in ecologically sensitive areas, and they've never observed an impact from it. Next, I wanted to discuss how long the river will be green for, because I know this is a public relations issue where there's high visibility of the river clearly as you're in the town of Winter Park and in Fraser. So the river will be at its maximum coloration during the dye tracer injection as we approach that plateau concentration. So this is the Slate River during our test in 2022, and at 3 p.m. was when we were approaching that plateau. And we would then have the peak concentrations at the downstream end of our study reach at around dusk. We basically plan out the entire injection so that we understand how quickly it's moving downstream. And then we do it around dusk so that it minimizes the visual impact for users of the river. And then by the next day, we discontinue the dye injection. And at that point, at the upstream location, the dye starts to just be flushed out by the natural flow of the river. It's also dispersed, so some of the water flows more quickly than other areas of the river, so it tends to spread the dye out. So it's not just one big slug of green water flowing through the river. And then finally, the dye is photosensitive, which means that it breaks down in UV light. So that's actually why we plan these injections for the afternoon, is that we don't want, for the scientific purposes, we don't want it to break down. But for public relations purposes, we do want any remaining dye the next morning to be broken down by the sun's rays. So these two photos show how completely back to baseline conditions the Slate River went. This was during the peak of the dye injection. And then at the same location the next morning, you can see that there's no remnants of the dye tracer left. So this brings me to the details of the proposal for the Fraser River dye tracer test. We would propose to conduct this between October 14th and 25th of this year, although during the meeting with Winter Park yesterday, we discussed that it could be planned to also be on Halloween, because that could make it a fun event for the folks in town. And we actually did the Slate River test on November 1st. So we were just the day after Halloween. And the test would be conducted from Confluence Park in Winter Park down to the confluence of the Fraser River with St. Louis Creek. And this is about 3 river miles. And the choice of that study reach is based on these other USGS data collection locations that we have within that reach. And then finally, I wanted to speak briefly to what would come out of this test from a scientific perspective. So after we can use the downstream dye dilution to understand where groundwater is coming in, we could go back and explore that area further with thermal cameras. So this is from the Slate River test. Again, we went back the next day. It had snowed overnight. And so the groundwater that's coming into the stream is warm compared to the surface water, which was at about freezing. And so you can see here that the warm inflowing groundwater actually forms a plume of warm water. And this is one of the things that helps to keep fish habitat within these groundwater supported streams. So we can go back and find the zones of groundwater discharge and then do some additional monitoring of those specific areas to get a better sense of the sustainability of groundwater inflow into the Fraser River through time. And that's actually what's shown in this this bottom graph is a data set that we collected from the slate that uses the data that were gathered during this initial dye tracer test. So that's the full presentation of the proposal, and happy to discuss any questions or concerns. And hopefully folks could hear me for the end of the.
Yeah,
End of
we
the
could.
talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, hey, this is Louis Gregor. I did have a couple questions. So is this really sort of an academic exercise? Is there anything actionable going to come out of this for the town?
Yeah, the actionable aspects from the town would be that we would be able to precisely locate within the Fraser River where there are zones of groundwater inflow. And there were folks from Trout Unlimited on and potentially, I'm not sure who's there in the room with you tonight, but this information could be used by stakeholders such as Trout Unlimited to identify the specific areas in the Fraser River where fish habitat is likely to be more sustainable with potential climate change. So as climate change increasingly warms both the summer and the winter in Colorado, these areas of groundwater discharge are likely to be some of the only places where aquatic life can survive in times when there's drought and low precipitation in summertime. It's one of the concerns.
I mean, I think the biggest issue for the Fraser is that the water's getting pulled away to the front range, right?
Yeah.
We lose
Yeah.
so much water. That's the biggest issue, I think.
And that was one of the other considerations that we discussed yesterday with the town of Winter Park, is that if we know actually where the groundwater discharge is occurring to the Fraser, then both the USGS or local agencies could actually identify those areas as potential groundwater protection zones. I'm not sure about the exact local ordinances that could be used in this case for that, but I know that in other areas of Colorado that has been done based on results from tests similar to this. Is that if you know where the groundwater is located at and the flow rates into the stream, you can actually define it as a protection zone.
So do we have to approve this? Is this something the town has a say so, or is it just?
This is, I mean, we would not want to do this without the basically the blessing of both towns of Fraser and Winter Park, because we want to have all the stakeholders buy in. I mean, we don't want to be doing things that in people's backyards that are unwelcome to them. We're not asking for permission or a vote or anything tonight. With the town of Winter Park yesterday, we asked that in their next meeting where they were conducting voting, that they decide on it at that point and then let us know.
So with the water rights in Colorado and all that, one of my fears is that you identify it and someone else lays claim to it. So I think the important thing would be that we can actually protect that groundwater once it's identified, so that it doesn't go to anybody else. It stays here in the Fraser River. And I think that's critical.
Is there any threat like that it could go somewhere else? I mean, with
I don't
water
know.
law?
I don't know. There's a lot of lawyers out there with a lot of money, and people want water rights, and
Right.
will go through a lot to get it. So that's
Well,
my concern.
you'd have to dig wells to get the groundwater, right?
Well, you can file on a spring, so I don't see how this would be different just because it's discharging into a body of water already, or
You can file on a spring, so I don't know that this would be different. And if it's actually discharging into a river, this is an interesting concept. Then it's actually in a transfer mechanism where it can go to a point of diversion for somebody else. So that's kind of an interesting concept that these could be filed on.
Yeah,
as new water rights, like a spring.
for the town and something that,
Yeah, and
Keeps the
I'm
water
not
in
giving
the
it
creek.
credit. I think it's a really interesting
Yeah.
idea. I don't know if it's proofed out or not, to be honest, but what I see is that, they're going to identify these locations and then there'll be subsequent studies. There'll be groundwater monitoring wells and stuff because this is about long-term water supply. And now you know where it supplies to the river, but you don't know how steady that source is. Or
I think it's worth discussing it with our water attorney to find out if they do this and identify that, what we can do to ensure that the water stays in the Fraser
yeah,
where it comes out and doesn't go anyplace else.
Do we have water rights to the
We
Fraser?
have to- I don't think so.
Who has water rights to the Fraser?
Denver.
Denver.
I mean, there's a portfolio going down to Fraser, and water rights, I mean, are just for a segment in space. You have to return the water you use and somebody else uses it afterwards. So that's
Yeah.
an odd question, I guess, to ask whose water is in the Fraser. I mean, really California's water is in the Fraser as well, so,
Well, the large landmass north of County Road 8 has a lot of water rights in the Fraser as well. And we have surface water rights in St. Louis that go to the Fraser.
it'd be interesting to see if the USGS could quantify the volume of water that's being contributed to the river as well, because those are things you need to file on a right. But I think it is at least asking Chris the question, get his opinion, or if he says, oh, gee,
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, definitely worth following up with for sure. Paul?
I would just add that our wells currently would be taking water that is in this same level.
Mhm.
We have shallow wells compared to we're in the top level
Mhm.
with we've diverted our St. Louis water right to the Fraser River wells. So the water we're taking is some of this water that's moving through the ground at this level. So
Hmm.
we're already taking water here.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure how much, and like
It's Denver.
Trustee Adams said, that this water fluctuates throughout the season. So some of our wells are great during certain times, other times the water's really low. So very much fluctuates, but our water rights are kind of in where this water is flowing currently.
Joe, did you have something?
I think with them measuring the water in the stream, it's already called for. Somebody already has rights for it. Because it's gonna be the minimum stream flows.
and it's all tributary.
But then the groundwater is what they're
it-
trying to measure.
But if them measuring it and what he described, that groundwater is gonna be coming up in the river.
Right.
And then
It's
somebody's already
already-
filed on that flow of the river.
Yeah.
So now, I don't think you can legitimately break that groundwater out of the flow of the river and file
Interesting.
upon it.
Okay, that makes
Because it would be
sense.
included in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Connor, I was wondering, can you share some of the scientific studies that show that this is safe? Other than just anecdotal information? 'Cause
Yeah,
that's-
certainly.
Because I
Yeah,
have concerns about what's happened in the past in Colorado and what quote unquote scientists have done, to study the rivers and poison native fish and introduce rainbow trout. All sorts of crazy things happened, and just want to, feel comfortable that the fluorescein is not going to accumulate in some species or, some fish. Are there scientific studies out there that have looked at this?
There are, yeah. I have 3 or 4 studies that I've downloaded and that I reference when I write up plans for this sort of stuff, and it's text format instead of presentation format like this. I have 3 or 4 studies that I reference, and I'd be happy to share those with you. One of the things to remember is in these studies is that particularly one of them in particular talks about fluorescent toxicity. So the whole study is about the toxic effects, and then they state the concentrations that those toxic effects occur at, and it's like 3 orders of magnitude higher concentrations than we would use. So that that's the one thing I wanted to mention about that particular study is that they didn't quantify the lowest concentration that's not toxic. They looked at really, really high concentrations and found them to be toxic to a certain animal. And then the other studies that I have look at kind of the boundary effect there. But yeah, I'd be happy to share those.
So there is a toxicity from it. It's just, you're saying the concentration they're using is so much lower that it's non-toxic.
Yeah, there, if you were to, so the dye comes in like a little bottle like this big. If you were to drink that, it'd be bad. But what we do is we do multiple dilutions of that. So I would take the bottle that's this big, and then I dilute that at like 1 to 5,000 or something like that into a 5-gallon bucket. And then the 5-gallon bucket sits on the side of the stream. And so even by the time it gets into the 5-gallon bucket, that is non-toxic, even at that concentration. And then that 5-gallon bucket sits on the side of the stream, and we have a little tube that injects into the river. And so that is another like 100,000 dilution or some order of magnitude like that. So we're going many, many orders of magnitude lower than the toxic level.
Okay, yeah, if you could share those studies, I'd like to look at them at least.
Yeah, if I don't think I have the contact information for everyone, so if someone wants to send me an email and then I can respond to you.
Hunter, you've already got this is Michael Brack, Fraser Town
Oh,
Manager.
okay.
Yeah, you can just send that to me. You've already got correspondence from me, so I'll shoot that out to the board.
Okay, sounds good.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, board, is it okay if I let the public speak now? Okay, go ahead and address the board to let us know your name if you live in the town of Fraser, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name's Catherine Morris. I'm the water quality manager for the county. So I work in Hot Sulphur Springs. I live in Granby, not here. And I just came to support Connor's study. I picked this up after listening to one of the NGWAS. He mentioned that, the National Groundwater Observation System, or whatever it's called, another acronym. And they're interested in doing this. And he said, I don't think I could ever do it in the Fraser, but I'd sure like to see it in the Fraser, because this information on groundwater is something that I've wanted to have for a long time. When I was reading the EIS for the Moffett project, the preliminary draft and all the subsequent drafts, I would have liked to have had better groundwater information specifically for this project. Sorry, for the Moffett project. Is that me?
It's the wind.
Okay.
If you guys mute yours, then there you go.
So I just wanted to let you know that we've had Connor present already to Learning by Doing and to East Grand Water Quality Board. I'm members of both of those organizations, and they got behind and support the study. Connor mentioned that Trout Unlimited was present last night, couldn't be here tonight, but they are also supportive of the study. They're also members of Learning by Doing. Our previous USGS studies on groundwater in the county, I have several publications from them, are all a quarter of a century old. So this is new, expanded information, good information that would help build upon those. Groundwater is cooling in summertime because it comes in at about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius, and it is stabilizing and actually warming in wintertime, which is important. You wouldn't think that wintertime temperatures are that critical, but it helps prevent anchor ice, which is ice that, freezes right through the riverbed and can rip off whole portions of your spawning gravels and things like that. So it's very important all throughout the year. And what's happening in lots of parts of the country, but particularly the West, our groundwater is becoming depleted. And so I would really like to have this information and hope that you will all decide to support that. I did look up the material safety data sheet because Paul had asked for that, or yeah, it was you. I think it was you. Anyway, toxicity to fish, the lethal concentration whereby 50% of the fish would die, and it's a certain species of catfish. Oh, okay. That's my timer. I see. Okay, it was 2,267 milligrams per liter. He's using a parts per billion, so micrograms per liter. So like he said, 3 or 4 orders of magnitude smaller, a lower concentration than this. And that's over a 96-hour exposure as well. So that's quite a long period of time compared to what Connor's going to be using here. And toxicity to Daphnia is, it's a little less of a concentration, 100 milligrams per liter, but still 3 orders of magnitude difference over a 2-day period. So not what he's dealing with here. So I think that's all I had. Any questions for me? Okay.
No, appreciate the information.
Thank you for entertaining us.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Catherine, as she's been instrumental in moving this proposed study forward. So I really appreciate all of her help.
Great. Any more discussion, board? Do you guys feel like you want to make an action in the next meeting?
We can certainly discuss it. I mean, I just have concerns. It's like in medicine, you don't do a test unless you're going to take some action, unless it's going to change your therapy or whatever. And if we're just doing it just, for academic purposes, and there's a potential negative effect, toxicity, then I'm a little skeptical of doing stuff just to say, let's study it, and, especially if we're not going to take any action.
Okay.
So anyway,
I'd
like to see the data. I'm not
Yeah.
that familiar with the data to say, one way or another, but that's kind of the way I feel about it.
So, is it Catherine?
Yep.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah, thank you. So, what would you do with this information, and what would you do to, what could forestry that the that this information is being used?
I think Connor mentioned that you could make a decision to protect your sources of groundwater. One of the things that they're also studying in conjunction with this, and Connor could talk more about it, is age dating the groundwater. Some of those older studies that I talked about show that the groundwater coming to Tabernash at that time is 40 years old. So from the recharge point to where it is hitting wells, it's taking 40 years to get there. And changes in the duration of time, I'm going to say this poorly, Connor, you'd better step in, but they can show a change in the water balance. They can show whether our recharge areas are recharging at the same rates, lower rates, higher rates, that sort of thing. Connor, can you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you stated it very well, is that if we can, the best way the way I always try to explain it is that if we can think of the groundwater system as a pipe, there's water going in somewhere that we don't really know where it's going in at. It's coming out at our well. The amount of time that it takes to flow on that pipe is the groundwater age. And because the volume within the pipe doesn't change, if you get less water, if you have less water coming out, that might be because there's less water going in. And that the only way to actually quantify that with any certainty is the age, how long it takes to travel. So we've been doing this proposal is part of a whole lot of other studies that we've been doing in the area. So we've collected data from wells around Fraser for several years that indicate the groundwater age may be changing compared to those previous USGS studies that Catherine mentioned. But if we don't have an understanding of how that relates to the stream, then we're kind of missing that last critical piece.
And I would add something that learning by doing, for example, might do if they had good information on groundwater locations and habitable portions of stream, is target our restoration work for specific reaches where we know there's going to be good success, or where chances are certainly higher of having good success, if that makes sense. So that would be something outside of what a town or a county or some municipality could do to protect groundwater sources as well, recharge zones.
And that's actually very similar to the photo that I'm still showing is the Slate River just north of Crested Butte. The landowner in the area that we did this test is the Crested Butte Land Trust. I've got them noted in the acknowledgments here. They're not a government agency, it's a privately owned land trust, but they used our information to identify these groundwater protection zones. And although they don't have, like statutory authority, they do have the conservation of the landscape in mind. And so they were able to implement some actions and suggested policies based on these zones of groundwater inflow.
The other thing I was hoping I could add after my 3 minutes were up. John Ewart couldn't be here. We asked him to be here today. He is out actually doing one of those rotenone studies that Trustee Gregory was talking about. And they use the fluorescent to measure transit times prior to doing their rotenone work on reclaiming, restoring, on potentially maybe he's putting cutthroat in. I'm not sure what he's doing in this particular bit of work that he's doing, but they use it all the time. And like he said, or like the quote said, in wilderness, without any detrimental effects. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay. We've got our action for next meeting, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, thanks everybody. Connor, thanks for that presentation.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, moving on to resolution 2024-0802, approving IGA for the Downtown Development Authority. Sarah Catan's right. Thanks.
Good evening. Good evening. So I have been continuing to work with our Downtown Development Authority Board, of which the members you appointed back in June. Since then, and since the ordinance went into effect, formally establishing the Downtown Development Authority the last week of June, the group has met 3 times. I wanted to provide you a quick update just on what they've been doing in that time and what they foresee doing moving forward, and then discuss the IGA that is being requested by the DDA board and the seed money that would be a part of that IGA. So they've spent their time, we kind of spent the first meeting doing a general orientation and discussion around what a Downtown Development Authority is, what tax increment financing is, the role of the DDA board and plans of development. These are topics we'll continue to kind of dive deeper, as some of them are complicated and nuanced topics. They've determined their regular meeting times, which will be the second Tuesday of the month at 9 a.m. here at Town Hall. They have been meeting about twice a month, and that'll probably continue through the fall as we work to establish the plan of development based on the timeline. They've adopted bylaws. Officers have been elected. So Lori Hannon, who's here, is our chair. Park Thompson's is the co-chair. Nick Crabb is the treasurer, and Katie Souls is our secretary. They've approved the draft IGA that's for your consideration today, as well as a contract with Ayers Consulting to complete the plan of development pending approval from the Board of Trustees this evening. And then also approved a contract with Troy Bernberg from Northland Securities to help with financial consulting services and tax increment financing assessment calculations. So moving forward, they are asking for a IGA to be approved by the Board of Trustees. A portion of that IGA talks about seed money. This would be to really just make sure that we've got those important foundational documents and strategic planning in place to set them up for success. The plan of development needs to be adopted and approved by the Board of Trustees before any tax increment financing can be collected and before any projects can be completed. It does serve for the lifetime of the DDA, so for 30 years plus possible extensions. It is possible to amend it, but that does involve the same process that you have to go through to initially adopt it. So it's recommended that you try to get a strong foundational document. As we've talked about in the past, you do want it to be somewhat general so that it can encompass a wide variety of projects that we might not be foreseeing today, 20 years from now or 30 years from now. But that it have enough direction to kind of shape the vision and the mission of the Downtown Development Authority. Ayers Consulting was recommended by Downtown Colorado Inc. They've recently completed a plan of development for Eaton that's in the process of being approved and adopted. If any of you visited downtown Loveland during the CML conference, the consultant actually worked with them before working with Ayers and oversaw the development project that happened in downtown Loveland. So they have a really nice plaza with a little stage area, a park, there's a parking structure, a hotel. So he really brings a depth of knowledge in this area in addition to having worked with other DDAs throughout the state. So that plan of development, it is a flat fee cost of $15,000. The tentative dates that are scheduled to be September 9th through the 11th. So him and his team would be here meeting with the Board of Trustees, the Planning Commission, the DDA board, local business leaders, any downtown stakeholders, really trying to hash out that vision for Fraser's downtown. At the end of those 2.5 days, we would have a draft plan of development that we would seek feedback on. And then that would be presented to the Planning Commission. We're hoping to get it to the Planning Commission in time for the September 25th meeting. That will be a tight timeline, but that would allow the board to review it in October. We do have a very firm deadline of needing to notify the county assessor that the plan has been adopted and that we would like to start collecting increment no later than December 10th. So really trying to make this happen. That allows us to collect any tax increment this year. And then that tax increment would be part of the increment moving forward every year. So it's not just that funding for this year, but all subsequent years. Other services that are considered that this seed money could be targeted for would be ongoing legal services to review things like the plan of development. Butler Snow, who helped with the formation, they also drafted the bylaws and reviewed those. And so it'd be continuing with those sorts of services. The financial consulting and services, making sure that what the county assessor deems the DDA should be receiving from tax increment financing, that seems accurate, helping with projections and building out financial policies. Any additional consulting services, again, around kind of that strategic planning and stakeholder engagement, as well as professional development for the Fraser Downtown Development Authority board members, so that they could participate in events put on by Downtown Colorado Inc., for example. Lastly would be kind of help with marketing, some limited marketing and website development. Some of these services I think would very much take place during 2024, things like that plan of development. There are some others that could potentially bleed into early 2025, just depending on the timeline and kind of what comes out of that plan of development process. Other services included in the IGA would be staff serving as the interim executive director of the Downtown Development Authority, as well as clerical services and record keeping by the town clerks, The financial director, Lori Waters, would oversee their budget and their funds and work with the treasurer on that. Additional administrative staff assistance, use of meeting and conference rooms, risk management insurance coverage is approved by CIRSA, and then information technology and limited marketing website and social media support. All of these are pretty standard for DDAs that are starting out. DDA budgets generally sit within the town budget, given that you as the Board of Trustees appoint the DDA board. Generally, the records are kept with the town through, our document center and things like that. So again, fairly standard services. We've tried to keep the IGA fairly general. It would go through the end of 2024 and then could be extended some of those services we would want to extend, but that just allows room for if there's any modifications to be made in 2025, or it could be renewed at that time. Staff does recommend approving this IGA and resolution number 2024-0802, which provisions for the IGA as well as for the seed money that's requested. Included in your packet is the ARIS Consulting Plan of Development proposal, just to kind of demonstrate what would go into that plan, as well as the IGA itself for the Fraser DDA in the town of Fraser. Any questions I can answer?
Is 30,000 enough?
We could ask for more. I'm sure they
mean-
could ask for more. I would anticipate that during the budget season, there would be an additional request for 2025. But I think this is enough to get the downtown development authority through the end of the year. There was some funds that were previously authorized towards like Butler Snow and DCI, Troy Bernberg, who's been working with. So kind of those monies that have been spent up till now in that formation piece, not considering as part of this pot of money would kind of be now through the end of the year.
And did you say it's every year for 30 years that we're doing this?
No,
So one time-
this is just for 2024.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would imagine this IGA would largely continue in its current format for 2025, but the money piece may be different. We're still waiting to figure out any increment from this year will be relatively small. But trying to figure out what that increment would look like and what sort of maybe low hanging fruit there might be in terms of projects, just to kind of keep the momentum of the Downtown Development Authority and have the group remain engaged in downtown. One idea in September, you will be bringing back in front of the board proposed changes to the business enhancement grant program and business incentives per the economic development workshop that we did back in June. So looking for what kind of role the Downtown Development Authority might have with that in terms of helping to promote those grants, maybe helping to monitor and make some evaluation choices. So different things like that that we're just not prepared to firmly put on the table right now, but that I think we might look at for 2025. Yeah, and I'm sure Katie or Lori could speak more to any of that if you'd like.
Your tax revenue should fund the project going forward, right?
Essentially, once we can start collecting.
Well, if we get tax revenues in 2024, shouldn't that fund next year?
It'll be a small pot and it'll be something.
Yeah.
It'll really grow when we have development downtown, because that's starting at a lower tax rate, right? So
Yeah, there's really a waiting game. DCI presented at the first DDA board meeting and they showed the picture of once the DDA is formed, you just kind of water your little seedling tree. Because you have to wait for that tax increment to really roll in. So it is fairly standard practice. And with the DDAs, the ones that are established in Colorado, I think have done a lot of awesome things and had a lot of success. We've also seen some of the smaller ones like Eagle, who we visited, kind of flounder and try to find their footing just because they don't have those revenues coming in just yet.
And a lot of that almost entirely evolves around new development, which we're primed for.
Right.
And just a note with the plan of development, that is going to be the foundational document for a lifetime of this Downtown Development Authority. So having that done well and having that being a very thorough document that has a lot of engagement with stakeholders, professional expertise for downtown development and projects priorities, I think is really critical to ensuring the success of this thing. And additionally, with using Troy Bernberg for the working with the county assessor as far as looking to establish that first methodology on how we look to gather this tax increment. I think it's going to be really important to set, get that methodology set in stone right the first time, to really help, build these revenues and get some projects done in our downtown.
I just want to make sure that we were transparent with the public that when they voted that we were going to pay 30 grand for the seed money. I mean, do you think the people in the town knew that that was going to happen? Do you think they would have voted differently if they would have known that?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say that with the presentations provided by Downtown Colorado Inc., that they said that this is something that is subsidized to get its feet at least underneath them for the first few years. I think for all the workshops and the committees that took place, I mean, I think that was discussed. I mean, Katie, you can tell me if you have any recollection of that, but I mean, it's definitely been seen as something that requires some care and feeding before it can really kind of move on its own.
But I never said anything to anyone about probably needing funding initially to get it off the ground.
Right.
But, these are dollars that the town has. And we're.
Well, they're-
something development.
Well, think
Well, and
about
I
this,
think-
So.
right,
it's
their
a-
dollars,
that's
we're using tax revenues to fund it, to provide seed money, and so it benefits the community. I mean, I think it's legitimate. I don't have a problem with it.
Right. And I mean,
As
the
long as we
voters,
consider it's seed money. This is not an ongoing, expense that the
Right.
town's gonna shoulder for 30 years.
And we can fashion it such that if there has to be subsequent, maybe it's a payback, so, a 10-year payback. We can fashion that as we need to.
right, right. I think it's just the cost of doing a DDA, and the voters voted to do a DDA, so I'm for it.
Well, but that's
I'm
the voters are only DDA people. This
Correct.
is
Oh.
entire town tax money. So,
Valid point.
I mean, but I do think it's small dollars. I do think it was inherent to the question that there would be some seed money. I do think we ought to keep some controls on it, though. If it ends up it's 5-10 years till the DDA is at critical mass, maybe should be some payback or return that's more visible, I guess, than just increased tax revenue.
So Sarah, has there been some discussion about timing and the possibility of getting the Coslick building put into the DDA and having that incremental
That's
difference?
why we have to have it done by December 10th.
Yeah, because that could probably be the $30,000 right there.
And that's the very rough estimate. We haven't gotten that from the county assessor, just with talking to them about, what they're expecting to pay in property taxes and separating out the land from the vertical construction. And again, you'd get that if you capture that this year, then that moves forward. You get that every year.
So that's why we kind of have to put this on the fast track. Because if we don't, then we'll have to go with their next assessed evaluation, which is built out.
Right.
So we won't get that big. increment on those
That's a
two
big deal.
buildings.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work that Sarah's been working on, that we've been testing, is back planning as far as, okay, we have to meet this deadline. Okay, plan of development, here's the engagement process. It needs to go to planning commission, it needs to come to the board, and there's set periods of time that have to float in between there for certain items. So we've been playing a lot of back planning. If the board doesn't like the plan of development or the planning commission wants to see some changes, allowing time for those changes to occur to make sure that we're meeting that deadline. So that's part of this process as well, is just making sure that we have these foundational documents so that we can start the clock. And then I agree. I mean, I think moving forward, if you want to have some type of repayment system or something in place that makes sense, I think that's totally justified. But I think it is the cost of doing a DDA at this point to get this thing off the ground and moving.
Lori, do you have anything? You want to say hello to the board? You want to say who you are? Don't want to put you on the spot.
Hi, I'm Lori and I'm the chair of the DDA. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said and I understand the entire conversation. And I don't think I need anything extra. I think Katie summed it up well. So thank you.
Oh, I'm gonna make a motion. Resolution 2024-08-02 DDA seed money and IGA PDF. I recommend that we approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion?
I have something. I just wish it was structured differently. Like I love the DDA. I think it's awesome, but it just, I don't think we were transparent enough with the public and when we put it out there that this was going to cost the whole town money, not just in the DDA. And that's all I have on it.
Yeah, I would just say one thing we're not thinking of is the incremental increase in sales tax we're gonna get from, these new businesses. That's gonna benefit the town, it's gonna benefit everyone, so. That's one thing we're not thinking about, but it is as these business start, develop, grow, there's gonna be additional sales tax revenue from those businesses, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. We're in the middle of a motion.
Say that all the time. That's money's already been spent.
All right, all in favor?
Spend money we haven't-
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Opposed.
Opposed?
Yeah.
Okay, 6-1. Motion passes.
Yay.
Okay, updates. Don't have updates?
I have one update.
Okay.
We did have the conversation, actually, Catherine Morris helped facilitate that conversation with the other sanitation districts. Again, there's no formal process with this, but the consensus between all the sanitation districts, even with Fraser and I think Winter Park Ranch, showing the priority for the funding split that we discussed the last regular meeting for the funds from Denver Water. It was decided that the 7-way split is the direction that everybody wanted to go. So that's what the process that we'll be likely working through.
I'm sorry, the equal,
7-way split. Yeah.
not the percentage.
Right. So I mean, for Fraser, it's going from $370,000 to $330,000 for that award.
Small lottery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Grandview Sanitation had the most to lose, and they were in support of the 7-way split. So I think that was really the big time.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
we'll keep you guys updated on that and see when we're looking at a closer timeline for getting those funds. Additionally, you may have noticed on our social media that the county did adopt the stage 2 fire ban. So that is now in effect. And over the weekend, the Forest Service did go from a stage 0 to a stage 2 just because of the dryness of a lot of the foliage on the ground and the trees and the fuels that are just present in our forest here. That's all I got.
Sorry, I'm looking through my notes from the North. We had the Northwest TPR meeting on the 25th of July. Winter Park and Fraser to be paved in either 25 or 26. The expansion plan is still being worked on as of right now. Let's see, and then Michael and I went to a meeting with Winter Park Resort earlier today. They showed their future plans. I don't know when the completion timeline of it is, but it's a full base area, probably 15 buildings if I was to guess, maybe more.
Yeah.
Potentially up to 2,200 parking spaces between 2 garages. Roundabouts at each of the entrances. Yeah, huge
I'm just
project.
going to mention they have it online. It's called Winter Park Unlocked.
Yes.
So it is on publicly available now. You can look
I
at
did,
that.
I did ask that
Unlocked.
question this morning and they said it's basically like a 10 to 15 year plan.
Mhm.
Some things are gonna move faster than others. Like, I was surprised the ski run from the resort to the town will probably get done before the gondola will, so that'll be an interesting twist, but yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It is. It is. Yeah, they need to put in a lift basically from the bottom of Wild Spur up to Cooper Creek North Mountain, and then they can put in that ski back trail.
Yeah.
And I didn't ask when that lift was going in, but it sounds like the vintage parking structure will be the first thing that they do. So.
Hmm.
Yes, that was the other thing I was going to bring up. They mentioned all the things that are happening, including commuter rail, passenger rail going through town, and they pointed out a stop at Winter Park Resort, and they pointed out a stop in Granby, and they did not point us out a stop in Fraser. So
You bring that up.
we need to make sure that
Yeah.
we are keeping our foot on the gas to make sure we don't lose our Fraser stop.
Don't do the Amtrak stop will be gone too? Or no?
Amtrak would probably stay, because I don't believe it's yet to be seen with the passenger rail how it's going to be structured, if it's going to be run through Amtrak or something else. So, yeah. Either way, I mean, the two towns should have both stops because it's going to be so congested at the resort. We need a stop for the people coming to this end of the valley. So, yeah, that's I think all I have. Any other updates?
I'll provide a quick update on the bike park. Sorry, just a quick update on the bike park. We have submitted a concept paper to GoCo and should know by the end of next week if we're invited to apply for funding. So that would be a nice pot. But there is a QR code out there up on our website and around that people can make private donations. So just wanted everyone to be aware that we are collecting. We've got about $1,200 so far. So yeah, hopefully we'll get some larger donors sprinkled in there, but working on a more of a fundraising strategy for that piece of it.
So is
As
it
we apply
tax
for the grant.
deductible?
It is, yeah. That was the reason we partnered with HTA.
Oh,
So
that's
they've
right.
set it up through Colorado
That's right.
Gives.
I read about
So
that.
yeah, it is considered going towards a 501c3.
Okay, thank you.
I'm trying to push for temporary tattoos that people can put on their neck.
That's
That's a QR code.
Maybe a t-shirt.
Okay.
Start there.
Wear it every day.
Okay. With no more updates, we can move into executive session. Hand it off.
I move to go into executive session 1 for the purposes of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations and or instructing negotiators under CRS section 24-6-402, parentheses 4, parentheses E, regarding the negotiations to include land use attorney Austin Flanagan, M. Mad, members Matt Ginsburg and Todd Moore, town manager Michael Brack, and assistant town manager Sarah Tanzarite. And I guess we gotta vote for that, right?
Can we do them both at the same time with the assumption or with the assertion that we will be adjourning the meeting as soon as these are both finished?
Executive session number 2 for the purposes of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategies for negotiations and or instructing negotiators under CRS section 24-6-402, parentheses 4E, regarding joint facilities oversight committee agenda review to include town manager Michael Brack, Public Works Director Paul Johnson, and wastewater treatment plant superintendent Joe Fuqua.
I move to approve both motions.
That was a motion. So do you want to second it?
Okay, I'll second it.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we will be going into these two executive sessions, coming out and immediately adjourning the meeting.
All right. So keep Austin on there.